Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening po sa inyong lahat. Nasaan man po kayo ng parte ng mundo. Welcome to our 89th episode of the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series brought to you by the University of the Philippines. Thank you for being a part of our credible online community. And to all those who have just discovered us for today, welcome po at sana po marami po kayong matutunan sa ating very unique and exciting topic for today. Ngayong araw pong ito, we are commemorating the 36th anniversary of the EDSA Revolution, which toppled a dictatorship and marked our return to democracy and free elections. Interestingly enough, recently din po, nagkaroon po tayo ng mga, let's say, ng mga events, maari pong maituring na malayo po sa atin, pero it's something that would actually affect us very, very soon. In the Ukraine, 18 years ago, nagkaroon din po sila ng people power. Ang tawag po doon ay the Orange Revolution of 2004, kung saan millions of ordinary citizens took to the streets to protest against authoritarian rule and corruption. Gaya po na nasabi ko, recent developments have made us concerned, lalo po sa mga nangyayari po sa Ukraine. Nagkaroon po ng military build-up, nagkaroon din po ng mga pagbobomba, etc., na talagang anticipating po na ito po ay mag-steadily increase in the next few days. So, ang tanong po natin, should the Philippines and its health workers be concerned about international conflict over and above our concerns, lalo po na meron pa rin po tayong nilalabanan ng COVID-19? For today's webinar, we will be tackling the question, giyera sa panahon ng pandemya, apektado ba tayo? If you are looking for the latest information from the most distinguished experts, keep it right here. I'm Dr. Raymond Francis Sarmiento, Director of the National Telehealth Center, National Institutes of Health, University of the Philippines, Manila. Always a pleasure to be with all of you for our regular Friday lunch date. And always looking forward po because I get to share hosting duties with our adjunct faculty, also the Special Envoy of the President for Global Health Initiatives, Dr. Susie Pineda Mercado. Dr. Susie?
Hi. Good afternoon, Raymond. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. We'd like to welcome all of you back to the webinar. Great to see all the familiar names. Although sometimes nakita, I think nung last anniversary natin, nakita natin yung mga faces. No? But I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. As Raymond said, we have a very, very interesting topic. We had prepared this actually because we really anticipated that something might happen in Europe, but we didn't realize that it would happen so soon na magkakaroon po ng digmaan doon. Ngayon, malayo po yan, pero wala nang malayo ngayon eh. Nakita naman natin, nagkaroon ng COVID sa China, umikot sa buong mundo. Hanggang ngayon, nandyan pa rin. No? So, nakatutok pa rin yung discussion natin doon sa COVID. We will still talk about COVID, but I think we wanted to zoom out a little bit and talk about what's happening in the rest of the world, because what is happening now is really quite, what should I say, disruptive, no? Maraming mga epekto. So, pakikinggan natin ang mga eksperto natin. Ngayon, yaman din lang pinag-uusapan natin giyera. I'd like also to mention that there is an event that happened recently in our community about one of our doctors. And you know, doctors, in whether in war or peace, are protected by medical neutrality. Doctors and nurses. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Ibig sabihin nun, ang mga manggagamot o mga rescue workers ay hindi dapat sinasama sa sa pamumulitika ng giyera. No, parang duty natin yan na tulungan ang sino mang nangangailangan regardless of your race, your religious beliefs, or your political affiliations. And these are agreed upon in the Geneva Conventions. So medyo nabahala tayo na meron tayong isang kasamahan na na inaresto. So we're going to show you the statement of the University of Manila community. So ito po ay galing sa UP Manila, UP College of Medicine, Philippine General Hospital, and the UP Medical Alumni Society. So the statement on the arrest and detention of Dr. Maria Natividad Castro. Dr. Maria Natividad Marian Silva Castro, an alumna of the University of the Philippines, Manila, College of Medicine Class 1995, was arrested on February 18, 2022 in San Juan City, Metro Manila. Dr. Nati has dedicated her medical career to providing health services to the poor, people in the rural areas of Agusan and other parts of Mindanao. as their community physician since 1996, after her graduation. She has become a staunch human rights defender, especially of the Lumads and indigenous communities, whom she has been attending to all these years. She's practicing what UP has envisioned its graduates to be, community-oriented, using the primary healthcare approach intended for the underserved. The joint WHO and UNICEF Alma Ata Declaration on Primary Healthcare endorsed in 1978 by 134 countries, including the Philippines, clearly states that health is a basic human right and the attainment of the highest level of health is a worldwide social goal. Dr. Nati has brought this advocacy to the halls of various agencies, including the United Nations in Geneva and the European Union Council in Brussels, where she presented the poor plight of the Lumads and how their rights as historical and cultural stewards of their land and heritage are being trampled upon in the name of so-called development. We are all concerned in the UP Manila community, including the UP College of Medicine and the Philippine General Hospital, that another doctor practicing in the underserved area where we have asked our graduates to serve is again being maligned and red tagged. We still remember with sadness and anger the death of our graduates, Dr. Bobby De La Paz, Dr. Johnny Escandor, Dr. Lou Tanco. We pray this does not happen to Dr. Nati. May justice be served and her rights under the rule of law be respected and upheld. We urge the UP community and the Filipino people to support us in this call for ensuring safety and welfare of Dr. Nati Castro. We embrace the Castro family and pray for strength as they endure this difficult time of uncertainty and hardship. So before we proceed with our program, I would like to ask us all to just have a moment of silence and for you to, I think, reflect on our personal intentions for this doctor who has been arrested. And we'll resume our program in a moment. So can we have a moment of silence, please? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So, okay. So Raymond, we go back to our program.
Thank you, Dr. Susie. For today's episode po, no, it's medyo mabigat ang ating tatalakayin. It's something that mentioned by Dr. Susie. The key adjective probably is disruptive. Disruptive of the supply chains po natin, whether it's in energy, sa pagkain, medisina, may cause po increase in prices. Meron din po tayong mga overseas Filipino workers po, maaaring mga kamag-anak po natin sila who may wish to be repatriated, mga naghahanda na po na lumipat po o nakalipat na po ng ibang mga lugar. Meron din pong mga refugees, marami po, like an exodus of those refugees from Ukraine to other parts of the continent could make the pandemic a little bit more difficult to control, no? So yun po yung mga kailangan pong kontrolin. Patungkol po sa, let's say, how do we manage the fear and the panic, and how do we make prudent actions po and take prudent measures for us to be informed and aware of these international events. Ano po ba yung mga preparations na kailangan po nating gawin, lalo na po sa health sector? How do we keep abreast of these events nang hindi po tayo kinakabahan o nagkakaroon po ng, let's say, ng panic mode, kumbaga. Marami po kasing mga developments in the last few days and increasingly parami ang ating mga developments, lalo po sa patungkol sa gera pong ito. So we have prepared, the TVUP has prepared po what we call po person on the street interviews, pero hindi po siya person on the street for this webinar. It is an introduction video wherein we interviewed po key personality po with regards to answering this question. Paano naapektuhan ang Pilipinas historically po nung panahon nung flu pandemic 1918? Ano ang mga sakit na lumaganap nung World War II at ano po yung mga pwede po niyang pag-usapan patungkol sa ating topic na ito. Please watch this.
Maraming mga pandemya na naganap sa kasaysayan. Isa sa pinakamalala dito yung influenza pandemic noong 1918 na naganap sa pagtatapos ng unang digmaang pandaigdig. Nakarating ang pandemya dahil na rin sa pakikipag-ugnayan natin sa ibang mga bayan. Nagkataon na patapos na ang unang digmaang pandaigdig. Maraming mga sundalo ang mga nag-uwian. Kasama na yung ilang mga sundalong Amerikano na nadestino dito o kaya yung mga nakasangkot sa digmaan sa ibang bayan na nakikipagkalakal dito sa atin. At dahil pandaigdigan ito, kahit na nagmula ang pandemya sa Amerika at kumalat sa Europa, naging bahagi ang buong daigdig. Sabi nga nila, dahil sa giyera, naging mabilis ang paglawak ng sakit. Yung bilis ng paglawak ng pagkalat ng mga sakit, makikita natin mas mabilis kapag mayroong mga digmaan o pananakop. Halimbawa, yung 1918 influenza pandemic, sa loob ng 24 na linggo, mas marami yung namatay sa influenza pandemic kaysa kung ihambing sa 24 na taon ng AIDS pandemic, no? Hindi kaugnay sa pakikidigma. Sa ibang bayan, ganun din ang naganap, no? Yung pagkalat ng bubonic plague, sabi nila ay parang huling alon ng digmaang nagaganap at pagpapalawak ng mga tagagitnang Asya patungong Europa na may dalang mga kuto, yung mga kabayong tumalon mula sa kabayo patungong daga at mula sa daga napunta sa mga tao. Kaya bubonic plague ang tawag. Nung sakupin ng mga Europeo ang Hilaga at Timog Amerika, halos 70 bahagdan ng mga mamamayan sa makalumang Amerika ang namatay. Hindi lamang dahil sa pakikidigma, malaking bagay yung digmaan, pero dala-dala ng mga Europeo yung tinatawag nilang Old World diseases, no? Bubonic plague, syphilis, cholera, at marami pang iba. So napakalaki ng kaugnayan ng digmaan, pananakop, at pagkalat ng mga sakit. Lalo na dahil ang mga tao ay nagiging mas mabilis ang paglikas, yung mga umiiwas ng digmaan o kaya paglipat ng lokasyon dun sa mga mananakop naman. Mayroong physical na immunity na pinanghahawakan yung ilang mga mananakop pero hindi nila alam carrier pala sila o tagabagdala ng ilang mga sakit na mahawa yung mga bayang sinakop nila. Kahit dun sa mga digmaan sa pagitan ng mga maliliit na bayan, na kahit hindi pandaigdigan yung saklaw, nagiging pandaigdigan yung epekto dahil sa pagkalat ng mga sakit. Sa maraming pagkakataon, yung halimbawang mga nahuling sundalo o yung nagaping mga mamamayan, no? Hindi lang sakit, no? Dahil mas magiging vulnerable yung mga nasakop na bayan o nasakop na lipunan at mamamayan. Kapag humihina na yung kanilang resistensya, kulang sa pagkain, kulang sa nutrisyon. At yung ganitong kalagayan, kalimitan, kapag may digmaan, mas nagiging malala yung kakulangan sa pagkain. Kung gayon, yung kakayahan ng pangangatawan ng tao na kumaharap sa mga sakit. No? Kahit endemiko yung sakit na matatagpuan sa kanilang sariling bayan na ng matagal, nagiging mas marami yung namamatay. Yung malaria, hindi siya pandemic. No? Endemic yan sa mga lugar gaya ng Pilipinas. Pero naging malala kasi pinagsiksikan nyo yung mga nahuling sundalo na nagmamarsya ng malayo, na pagod, kulang sa inumin, sa pagkain, no? Mababa ang resistensya, kulang sa nutrisyon. Maraming mga mamamayan yung namatay, sanhi ng paglala ng kalagayan dahil sa pagkakasakit at digmaan na laging parang magkakambal.
Okay, thank you very much, TVUP. Very interesting. And Raymond, first time we've done that historical kind of a piece, no? Na actually ang digmaan at ang mga pandemya o epidemya ay parang magkasama palagi, no? So ngayon na nakakakita tayo ng gera sa Europa, yun, gusto natin malaman nga anong epekto nito sa lahat ng ginagawa natin sa COVID. So we have great speakers for you. I know we started a little serious, but we feel kasi for Dr. Natia. So anyway, we started a little serious, pero we'll gain our energy back now. And I just wanted to say that for those of you interested in reading more about what happened to the Philippines in 1917, yung pong speaker natin dito sa na interview na yan, si Dr. Francis Dialogo, ay ano po ito meron siyang publication sa Ateneo tungkol doon. In fact, it's the only one that I've seen that's really doing a documentation of how we cope with the pandemic in 1917. So kung gusto niyo pang matuto tungkol doon, basahin niyo po yun, hanapin niyo si Dr. Francis Dialogo. Okay, so ano magagawin natin next? Okay, so before we proceed, I think I just wanted to say na itong webinar na to ay hindi naman para manakot, di ba? Parang nakakatakot na nga yung nakikita natin sa TV. Pero ito ay para tayo bilang mga frontline health workers ay merong sapat na kaalaman tungkol sa nangyayari. And today, sabi nga natin, lahat ng talino kailangan natin para mapuksa yung COVID. We have some lawyers who are going to talk, very well known, who will be talking to us about this. But before that, we will still do our fun quiz. I'm gonna turn over to... Ay, hindi ka pa mag-fun quiz, Raymond. Bibigay ka lang ng Mentimeter, ganun ba?
Yes, and announcements, Dr. Susie.
Sige, go, Raymond.
Some of our announcements naman po is just general information, especially for those na talagang sumusubaybay. But we wanted to mention also that our webinar, again, can accommodate up to a maximum of 3,000 participants. So please join us in Zoom so you can fully experience po ang interactive program po natin. Nevertheless, we are also available in YouTube and in Facebook po. So that you'll be able to, well, if you are the one na talagang babad po sa social media, you'd still be able to participate by putting in sa comment section ng ating live streaming po, whether in YouTube or Facebook, makikita po ang ating mga katanungan. Meron pong nagmo-monitor po niyan, and if there are any interesting questions, we will be likely to pick them up and then post them to our panel of experts. Meron din po tayong question and answer box dito po sa Zoom. So we hope that you could start entering, especially if you have any questions na po even before the webinar has started. Please feel free to put them in the Q&A box po. For those who are asking, certificates of attendance will be given to those who have watched at least 50% of the webinar duration. We have already sent out all, at least for the previous 88 webinars po, no, na meron po tayo. Partial pa lang po yung sa webinar 88, but for the 87 webinars, we have already completed it. If you feel that you should have received a certificate for that, please let us know. At hindi po kayo naka-receive po by emailing stopcoviddeaths@up.edu.ph. Meron din po tayong tinatawag na Menti meter po. It's parang kapatid po siya ng Zoom poll po natin. So for today's webinar, if you open your browser and go to www.menti.com and enter the code 37491856, that's 37491856, you'll be able to participate in our fun quiz before we start the webinar. Today's webinar will still follow the standard panel discussion format. And after our main speaker has presented, we have a panel of reactors who will weigh in a Q&A session wherein we will entertain questions from our Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube audience. And then, so to get the ball started, Dr. Susie will now introduce our opening remarks speaker.
Okay, thank you very much for all of that, Raymond. Okay, so for our opening speaker, hindi po ito na sa atin. kilala niyo po siya. Siya po ay haligi ng, hindi lang ng COVID response, pero ng webinar na ito. Dahil kung hindi sa kanya, hindi kami nagkaroon ng tayo nagkaroon ng webinar na ganito. Siya po ang Senior Advisor of the National Task Force Against COVID-19 and currently Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at the Philippine General Hospital, former Undersecretary of Health. Welcome back to your webinar, Dr. Ted Herbosa, and we have a very interesting behind you. So go ahead, Ted, take the floor.
Good afternoon, Susie, and good afternoon, Raymond, and good afternoon to everyone and all our speakers and reactors today. We have lined up a very important group of people, and we shift today, no? And we look at the bigger global events. We get away from COVID in a while, and we continue to struggle with the pandemic, no? Hindi pa tapos ang pandemic. We are all hoping it's already the end game of the pandemic, but before it's even over, another global crisis is unfolding right before our very eyes. When we were planning today's webinar, what we wanted was to inform people and not to cause panic because of the tensions that were happening in Ukraine and Russia. But apparently by yesterday, 24 of February, 5 a.m., the armed forces of the Russian Federation, with the support of military forces of Belarus, launched an intensive shelling of Ukrainian units on the east, delivered missile bomb strikes on airfields in Borinspil, Ozern, Kulbakino, Chulov, Kramatorsk, Cholnobakyava, and ang hirap naman sabihin itong mga places na to, and other military infrastructure of the armed forces of Ukraine. At the same time, the aggressor started artillery shelling in areas and settlements along the state's border and administrative boundary, and also near the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea. The National Defense Forces, using its right for self-defense of Ukraine, according to Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, started countering and with dignity was fighting attempts to break that were trying to invade into the territory of Ukraine. So according to Ukraine and joint forces, meron silang mga napadown na aircraft, 6 daw, 2 helicopter, 4 na tangke. That's of course the side of what they're saying. And even the UN Secretary General yesterday gave a statement. President Putin, in the name of humanity, bring your troops back to Russia and end this conflict now. And now, the alignments are becoming clearer. No, the Philippines needs to prepare for flashpoints activity that can happen in Taiwan and the West Philippine Sea, and this is happening as we actually speak. And this can happen very fast. And so everyone has to monitor this on what's happening in Ukraine, because those things are going to happen also, maybe, hopefully not, in the Philippine area. And China rejected calling Russia's moves on Ukraine as an invasion. Now, if you remember, nag-usap lang itong si Putin at saka si Premier Xi sa closing of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. And hindi natin alam kung anong pinag-usapan nila. But ang official statement ng China is not to call it an invasion, and China is closely monitoring. Ito yung official statement ng kanilang spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry. China is closely monitoring the latest situation. We call on all sides to exercise restraint to prevent the situation from getting out of control. And this is perhaps the difference between China and Westerners. Sinabi ng statement nito na you are always rushing into conclusions, she said. And regarding the definition of an invasion, I think we should go back on how the current situation in Ukraine is. The Ukrainian issue is a very complicated historical background. I think they're trying to refer to their Taiwan problem, and it may be what everyone is not actually seeing. And the spokesperson said that the Ukraine issue is a very complex historical, and reiterated that China understands that it was Russia's legitimate concerns on security, according to a statement from the Foreign Ministry. Ang Taiwan naman, on the other hand, scrambled their jets yesterday, and this is in response to aircrafts entering what they call the Air Defense Identification Zone. Hindi pa to part ng territory ng Taiwan, pero laging lumilipad ang mga Air Force ng China doon sa area na yun. And they scrambled. They saw 8 Chinese J-16 fighters on this area and one Y-8 reconnaissance propeller airplane over the southwestern tip of Taiwan. Taiwan's air defense, tinatawag na air defense. The air defense identification zone is an area of airspace beyond the nation's territorial boundary, but it maintains air traffic control over that for the sake of national security. And as we all know, China continues to regard Taiwan as a breakaway province. In fact, many countries recognize that it is one China, di ba? One China policy. And anytime they want to go that's like recovering their territory. So parang they're making an analogy to this. So the defense analysts are speculating that China may move against Taiwan as the chaos of the Russian invasion in Ukraine ensues. So nakita natin talagang na-endanger yung buong mundo dahil dito sa nangyari sa invasion of China ng Ukraine by Russia. Pero we need to also look at it. And I would like to quote Susie Pineda Mercado made a nice post in her Facebook account. And this morning she wrote, war in Europe will undermine all international COVID control measures of the world. There will be disruptions in supply chains for food, medicines, vaccines, and basic commodities. Fuel prices are already soaring. Wheat prices will escalate in Russia and Ukraine, and these are the largest producers of wheat. So prices of bread will go up. Russia reports about 150,000 plus cases of COVID daily. Ukraine, with a population of 40 million, reports 25,000 cases daily. This war will trigger an unimaginable humanitarian refugee problem in the European continent in the middle of this pandemic that is raging with new variants. This also means that the attention and resources for the pandemic recovery might be diluted because of the human security issues. So palala ng palala ang ating problema. I will end by quoting Pope Francis that he stated, "I have great pain in my heart over the worsening situation in Ukraine. And like me, many people all over the world are anguished and worried." Once again, he asks everyone's peace and to stay and pray and actually fast for this coming Ash Wednesday. So with that, I'd go back to you, Susie and Raymond. Thank you very much for allowing me to do this introduction.
Okay, thank you very much, Ted. I think that's a great way to, what should I say, to frame our topic today. And ending with Pope Francis, I think also is something na pwede nating kapitan, di ba? Meron tayong panghawakan naman yung pananampalataya, our faith. But we want to be informed, no? So parang I think we really want to bring information to our frontliners because we do feel that this will affect our COVID control efforts. Okay, Raymond, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Herbosa, for setting the tone for our webinar. Before we start with our webinar proper po, no, we will have our fun quiz po muna. We hope those who are in the Zoom and have logged in sa Mentimeter will be able to participate. We only have 2 questions for today. As always, those 2 questions are as follows. If there is a war in Europe, which will be affected? Ito po ba ang prices of food? Number 2, prices of fuel. Number 3, availability of drugs and medicines. Number 4, OFW repatriation. And number 5, ang mental health. So, meron na pong at least 67 who have entered their answers para sa question number 1, at least in Mentimeter. I'm not seeing po doon sa Zoom kung ilan na po ang sumasagot because I will need co-host powers for that. Anyway, we'd like to greet those who are joining us from LGU Mabalacat, Pampanga, from Carsigma District Hospital, General Mariano Alvarez in Cavite, Foundation University College of Nursing, Dumaguete City, from the Bureau of Fire Protection in Zamboanga, J.R. Borja, General Hospital, Cagayan de Oro. And then for our question number 2, ano po ba ang ibig sabihin what the CBRN mean? Ito po ba ay bagong club o bago pong acronym po natin? Is it chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear events? Does it refer to COVID-19 bacteria, RNA, and RNA viruses? Or number 3, cancer, bacterial infection, remission, and neurologic effects. So, majority of those who have answered, lagpas na po ng 300, have chosen option number 1. Ganun din po para po sa ating Mentimeter. Hopefully those who are joining us internationally are also able to participate po, no? Especially the ASEAN Secretariat from Jakarta, Indonesia, the National Center for Global Health and Medicine in Japan, Chonin Hospital in Taipei, Taiwan, Bukit Mertajam in Penang, Malaysia, the University of Hail, Saudi Arabia, Lonichi Ali, University of Blida 2 in Algeria, the UP International Nursing and Healthcare Forum in Lexington, Virginia, Upmasa Group in Burtonsville, Maryland, and from Edmonton, Canada. We will not be closing our fun quiz po, no? Especially for those who are trying to participate. Hopefully, mas marami pa po because we have 681 in the Zoom and mas marami pa po sa nadagdag sa YouTube and Facebook. So hopefully you'll be able to join us. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Hey, thank you very much, Raymond. And yeah, very interesting topic we have today. And without further ado, let me introduce our main speaker. Okay, so it is with great pleasure that I'm introducing our presenter. He is a teacher, thinker, leader, human rights lawyer, climate justice advocate, social entrepreneur. Nakikita niyo siya sa radyo, sa television kasi nai-interview ito, no? Dahil siya ay isang dalubhasa. Siya rin po ay isang educator, no? Nagtuturo. He's currently professor of law, philosophy, governance, and politics in a dozen universities and learning institutions in the Philippines. He is currently UP Law Professorial Lecturer in Constitutional Law and was formerly Dean of the Ateneo School of Government. We are very fortunate to have him today. Busy yan, pero napaunlakan niya tayo. Siya po ay dati ring Undersecretary ng Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Kilalang-kilala po siya. Dr. Antonio G.M. Laviña, Dr. Tony Laviña. Tony, welcome to the webinar. Salamat na tinanggap mo ang imbitasyon namin.
Thank you, Dr. Susie, and thank you to Dr. Raymond, Dr. Ted, and others also, of course, in the panel and lahat na nandito ngayon to listen to and watch this webinar, no, and participate in this webinar. Napakahalaga po ng topic natin. Ako very personal sa akin actually because of the energy aspect kasi napakalaking implication in terms of my own personal work na nangyayari sa Ukraine in terms of energy, in terms of climate change. Babanggitin ko yan mamaya. But of course, it's much larger than that na yung implications nito. So I have a very short presentation and let me...
Yeah, go ahead, Tony. Sige.
Let's start with...
Mo siya, i-slideshow mo siya.
Slide ko siya. Let me start with that. I mean,
yeah,
so
okay.
And crisis in the Ukraine, implications for the Philippines. Yun ang magiging focus ko, no, yung implications for the Philippines, although hindi natin siya pwede ring iwasan yung implications sa buong mundo kasi some of the implications to us is because of the global implications, no? Ito yung aking outline. Una, siguro it's good to spend a couple of minutes to understand what's happening, no? Why did we get here? To the crisis, to the war in Ukraine. O sino bang may pwede bang i-blame dito? Saan dapat yung Pilipinas posisyon just geopolitically? So I'll spend a few minutes there. Then of course, ilan ito nabanggit na kanina. Ano yung immediate consequences sa atin, lalo na sa inyo ng mga health professionals at sa COVID crisis? Anong immediate consequences ng giyera na ito, no, yung anong ibig sabihin ng pandemya sa loob ng digmaan. Kanina narinig natin si Dr. Geologo na kulig ko din na nabanggit niya ano nangyari ng World War I at yung Spanish flu, ano yung interaction ng sakit at ng giyera. And so we actually need to reflect on that as well. And then I will look at medium term, yung a little bit longer than immediate. Diba? Yung immediate to me is like 6 months to 1 year. Medium term is as short as 2 years, 5 years na scenarios, no? I mean, at implications sa atin bilang bayan. I mean, and then to start the ball rolling, because the panel will probably be discussing that a lot, yung how do we respond, no? Ano yung response natin sa crisis na ito, anong priorities na dapat natin gawin para hindi naman tayo helpless, di ba? We don't want to catastrophize and yung feel afraid. Although, I have many friends in Europe, Filipino OFWs in Europe, sinasabi na all over Europe, people daw are huddling in street corners, in coffee shops, looking at their phones, looking at television together, very worried about what's happening. This is the biggest war in Europe since 1939, since World War II. There was the Balkans, as you know, pero medyo contained yung Balkans and medyo mas civil war yon, di ba? Although may Serbian na aggressor doon, but nagka-civil war din doon sa loob ng Balkans, yung Croatia, Bosnia lalo na, and of course Serbia. But this one is bigger than that. I mean, much bigger country, much more yung kanyang location in terms of Europe. If you look at it, grabe yung location niya in terms of Europe. I mean, it's the kind of country and a kind of war that can easily lead to a bigger war. I mean, and then of course I always want to look for the silver lining, no? Ano ba opportunities sa atin dito bilang bayan, no, na maaari sigurong ma-resolve ilang mga bagay na dapat matagal nang ni-resolve. Just to open up the discussion. So perspectives lang on the crisis, bakit siya nagaganyan, di ba? So one way of doing this fairly is just looking at the different perspectives. So not NATO, US, Europe, this is pure invasion of another country, but hindi naman siya member ng NATO, so hindi sila, di ba, hindi sila involved militarily. So kanilang response is mainly economic sanctions at political responses. But at the same time, worried sila na this can lead to, of course, other countries that are nearby. Some of them already NATO, di ba? Yung mga Baltic states, di ba, mga I think Estonia, Latvia, yan, mga NATO yan. Of course, Eastern Europe, di ba? Poland, Hungary, mga NATO countries na yan. So imagine kung mag-spill over doon. Of course, worried din sila sa economic consequences ng sanctions nila, ng gera, at of course yung refugee crisis na probably more than 1 million, even more, will be going to Western Europe during this crisis, no, if it's especially not contained. So yan ang perspective ng NATO, US, Europe, di ba? Of course, there's a Russian perspective. Incredible, makinig ka kay Putin, it's a historical perspective. There's no such country as Ukraine, according to Putin. Creation lang daw yan ng Bolsheviks, ni Lenin. Yan ang kanyang official na sinasabi, that's always been part of Russia. And of course, yung kanyang security concerns na ang pangako nung nag-fall yung USSR, di ba, na hindi mag-expand yung NATO, legally wala naman talaga ganung pangako, di ba? Gorbachev actually wanted that agreement, pero hindi rin pumayag yung US ng agreement na hindi sila mag-expand. But the truth is that they threatened yung Russia with that expansion, objectively threatened by the expansion of NATO. And has made it di ba, yung kanyang political excuse for doing this is kung yung Ukraine ay papasok ng NATO, at yung internal conflicts within Ukraine kasi may mga Russian speaking regions and sa Ukraine, di ba? So we heard Putin say that. I think the personality of Putin is also very very important, no? I mean, the speech was really, ito talaga, the vision of Putin is to get back the USSR, put it back, di ba? Which is really, take it or leave it, di ba? Parang gano'n na klase na, and he will use the power of Russia for that. In my view, he threatened the use of nuclear weapons during his last speech when he announced kung pakialaman nyo kami, di ba? I have everything, I have a lot of things on my favor that I can use against you. Directed yan to NATO, directed to Europe, directed to US. And then if of course the Ukrainian people, di ba? I mean, syempre ang sympathy ko is not with Russia, not with NATO, not with US, but with Ukrainian people, and particularly the civilians of Ukraine. And we're seeing that suffering that's going on already. May mga friends ako na Ukrainian, they do not consider themselves Russians. Yung aking mga, even if they speak Russians, even the Russian origin, but they do consider themselves Ukrainian. From this point of view, and I think for countries like the Philippines, this is an invasion of a small country by a powerful country. Nabanggit din kanina ni Ted yung China. China's been trying to be certainly not anti-Russia, but at the same time, it's been saying na territorial integrity of countries should be respected, etc., etc. So we'll have to see how China responds in the days to come sa UN Security Council, kung makivito ba sila ng mga actions. Of course, Russia will veto those actions. We'll have to see how China will respond to trade, di ba? The sanctions, mukhang they'll take advantage of it and in fact supply Russia with what it needs. And of course, biggest thing of all, medium term, tingnan natin how China will behave in our own backyard sa South China Sea, sa West Philippine Sea, sa Taiwan, on whether what happens in Ukraine will embolden China to also do something similar dito sa dito sa malapit sa atin. I think those are fair questions to ask. Immediate consequences, nabanggit na ito ng ilang beses ng gobyerno natin. Sabi ni Secretary Locsin, ito yung priority niya, yung 300 OFWs natin sa Ukraine. Obviously, I would have hoped na nila, di ba, na repatriate na nila, nalipat na nila to at least to other European countries nearby. But I suppose it's not gonna be that difficult kasi 300 lang siya. I mean, although grabe ang dito yung from what I'm seeing lang, parang in fact may problema ang Russia later on for war crimes dito kasi parang indiscriminate, di ba? Binobomba mga cities, binobomba yung civilian places, and maybe impossible. You cannot have a war in a modern industrial state without hitting cities, di ba? Kasi pag mga Middle East, mga Africa, pwede naman ang gera dun lang sa countryside, di ba? Hindi sa mga cities. But dito, kung titamaan mo yung cities talagang, tatamaan mo yung civilians. So I think our OFWs are endangered for that reason. Siyempre, our OFWs in Europe are all worried kasi una, magkakaroon ng crisis sa buong Europe ng refugees, di ba? They will accept refugees, that's for sure, kasi, well, to be honest, from a race point of view, kasi these are white Europeans, di ba? So wala masyadong discrimination in terms of race. And pangalawa, syempre, nearby. Para din siyang yung Yugoslavia noon na madaming pumasok from the Baltic, from the Balkans, not Baltic, from the Balkan countries na nag-evacuate to Western Europe during the civil wars that were there, di ba? So syempre may impact yan sa job opportunities, may impact yan sa treatment of the OFWs. In general, may refugee crisis na yung Europe, di ba? Even without this, lalala ang refugee crisis sa Europe because of this, and therefore we will be affected. Also, our own OFWs will be affected. Alam ko yan kasi I actually teach a lot of courses in leadership courses at yung mga OFWs in many countries in Europe, and I know they are worried from their posting, from their messages kung anong impact sa kanila. Dito sa Pilipinas, sa atin at home, I think immediately yan, yung energy, oil, gas prices will mararamdaman na kaagad natin yan. I mean, baka within the week, kung hindi pa siya tumaas, tataas na siya. Kaagad with all its, di ba, impact on inflation and other prices. Because Ukraine is a powerhouse sa agriculture, lalo na sa wheat, sa corn. All over the world there will be production crisis, there will be a glut in supply, etc. I mean, nabanggit na kanina, it's not my expertise in supply chains for medicines, di ba? For all the COVID treatment, medicines, vaccines, etc. will be affected by this, di ba? Yung overall inflation. So ito immediate ito, as in the next week or so, itong mga consequences na ito ay mararamdaman na at lalala na. Lalala din, no? But mas worrisome sa akin, I mean, already worrisome na yung immediate consequences, pero yung midterm, di ba, which anything 6 months to the next years, di ba? Depending on what happened, di ba? Kasi alam nyo, it could very well be, no, hindi ko pa alam, hindi ko pa mag-gauge watching all the different news and all the reports, di ba, and reading everything na kung how fast Russia will be able to crush Ukraine, di ba? Kasi they're all over na, they're even in Kiev na, di ba? And it seems that the target is to kill, for example, the president, decapitate the cabinet, yung talagang put up a puppet government as quickly as possible. Of course, every Ukrainian now seems to be armed, so most probably may insurgency. Diba, sabi na, mas madali ang gera, mas mahirap yung consequences ng gera kasi how to stop the war, di ba? Kasi in this case, there will be an insurgency. So most probably magiging protected yung gera na yan with lots of possibilities of expanding, di ba? Beyond the territory of Ukraine, di ba? So and of course, even if Russia wins, the sanctions will be there. I mean, and there will be the consequences will stay for a long time. I mean, so ito yung mga nakikita kong major ones that have an impact on COVID, an impact on us, no? A collapse of global cooperation, di ba, of institutions, UN. Siyempre, yung UN Security Council will be, di ba, disempowered kasi at least one veto yon. International institutions like WHO, they'll all be affected, di ba, ng ganitong klaseng tension. Russia will also have its allies, and if Russia and China allied already, malaking hindi yan easily ma-disregard ng mga institutions. So pwede ka talaga magka-stalemate in many decisions. Ako personally, I'm very worried about climate change actions kasi, di ba, we're running out of time. We're losing time for the climate emergency. Nakita lang natin yan. Naranasan natin yung Dept last year, di ba? After Glasgow last December, medyo I was a bit yung hopeful na certain things will be done. Magmi-meet ulit sa December this year. Maraming actions pinangako. But when there's a war, a big war, talagang actions on things like climate change, on environment, on whatever problems the world also needs to address, talagang napaput aside siya, hindi siya nagiging priority. Economically, ito, di ba? The Europeans will need cheap energy. Of course, there will be a push na dapat renewable energy, but that might not be enough. So they'll have to find oil, they'll have to find kaya tataas ang prices ng oil and gas all over the world, di ba? Kasi the Europeans will have to find a significant percentage of their energy needs from these places. So yun, goodbye yung mga emission reductions mo dapat na no? So ako, I'm very worried about that part. The impact of trade, no, on food, on minerals, is really quite also important to watch out for na kasi yung economic sanctions, finance, kasi banks will be affected, di ba? Credit all over the world will be affected, and so kailangan natin bantayan lang. Tourism obviously will be affected. I mean, especially in Europe. I mean, but meron yang magkakascade yan kasi yung insecurity ng mga tao na, di ba, kung magbiyahe ka tapos may gera tapos mag-expand yung gera, bakit ka magbibiyahe, di ba? Nabanggit ko kanina, potential consequence dito, war crimes, kung maraming civilians na papatayin, halimbawa kung even killing a leader actually of a country is a war crime in itself, no? So isa yan sa mga potential consequences na long term, which makes it then even more difficult to find a solution, di ba? For someone like like Putin, it becomes difficult kasi siya mismo ang pwedeng i-charge for being a war criminal, di ba? And medyo solid yung kanyang in power doon sa Russia. So unless the Russians themselves, di ba, may konting demonstrations na all over Russia, at least in the cities against the war, but so far there's nothing that tells us na, di ba, ma-overthrow si Putin. And then biggest of all, at this point gusto ko lang siyang, di ba, kumbaga i-park lang natin. Wag tayo siya kasi nakakatakot talaga siya kung iisipin ng mabuti na pwedeng mangyari, di ba? Kasi so far yung China is, di ba, parang trying to be very rational, yung hindi siya kasama sa US, NATO, etc. Hindi rin siya super pro-Russian, di ba? So parang I guess they're very, very careful on what to do. So right now I'm okay with what China is doing in terms of this crisis, no? Kasi parang hindi naman sila masyadong nag-take ng side na I think more pro-Russian than anyone else, but also cautious, di ba? I guess they don't know how this will turn out, no? Even for Russia. But ang consequence nito kasi, if Russia gets away with it, China might be emboldened in the future, di ba? Dun sa South China Sea, including that part of the South China Sea which we claim as West Philippine Sea, no? Part of our exclusive economic zone, yung pinag-aawayan natin sa China, and even worse, Taiwan, di ba? Kasi yung Taiwan, napaka-emotional issue yan, di ba, for China, yung and any kind of provocation by the Taiwanese themselves or by the US, for example, recognizing something in Taiwan or presidents of Taiwan o mga ganon, can lead to that kind of situation na mag-escalate yung tension. So kailangan i-park natin siya, wag masyadong magpanik, matakot doon, pero kailangan natin bantayan ng mabuti kasi ang daming security issues that will arise if mag-escalate yung tension natin sa China. And of course, OFWs, di ba? Taiwan alone, 250,000 OFWs. Hong Kong, same na a little bit more than that, di ba? So lahat yan may impact yan sa COVID, may impact yan sa economy natin if eventually of those people have to be repatriated kung grabe na yung tension at escalation ng tension. Okay, so my last slide and my last point lang is ano yung priorities natin dito, no, sa crisis na ito to prepare for these scenarios, no? Yung mga immediate ones, I think ginagawa na nila, di ba? Yung DFA prioritized the OFWs, di ba? I think they're trying to calm all the different OFWs in the we made it very clear. I think I saw kanina Defense Secretary Lorenzana saying neutral naman tayo dito. Tama yon, independent foreign policy has to be really followed here, di ba? Hindi tayo dapat nagsaside ng any one of the actors here, while also, di ba, making sure na we do not want war, di ba? We do not want invasion by one country over the other. I think you can be neutral naman and independent, but also saying na knowing that you're a small country yourself, di ba, that could be subjected to this. Now, that's a good principle. No war, no invasion, di ba? A big country should not small countries, no? I think we need to go deeper in the needs that we will have to look at. Kaya nilagay ko yung last slide together with the scenario slide, yung priority slide. Kasi I think importante tingnan natin ano ba yung ating pwedeng gawin in terms of the diplomacy, the institutions, the global institutions, the ones we need most. Halimbawa sa COVID, di ba? WHO is what we need most, yung cooperation natin, bilateral and multilateral cooperation natin sa vaccine, sa treatments. Kailangan na address kaagad natin kung ano yung pwedeng magka-problema doon and to have alternatives already, develop alternatives for for that. I mean, ganun din sa climate change, ganun sa trade, di ba? Kung mag-tourism mag-suffer, kasi akala natin magre-recover na tayo this year, then we need to be able to address, lalo na yung mga livelihood consequences if you cannot go back to tourism yet. I mean, kailangan din ng pag-intindi ng history lessons dito sa atin, di ba? Nabanggit kanina yan ni Dr. Geology, di ba, ng yung what happened during World War II, and there was a pandemic, there was war. A lot of disinformation happened, di ba? A lot of conspiracy theories happened. Lalo ngayon, meron tayong social media, mas lalo sigurong lalala na naman yung ano na yan, di ba? So I think the most important part of the learning from history there, di ba, is that the pandemic doesn't stop even when there's a war, di ba? That it can become, in fact, a driver for even worse things that will happen. I think si Dr. Susi has mentioned that several times, na Russia's X number of cases a day, and Ukraine has that number of cases. Kung may refugee crisis, di ba? Yung mga Ukrainians, and that's a dami, hindi mo basta-bastang ma-screen, di ba? And then people are still traveling, di ba? Kasi ngayon, parang nilift na natin yung mga travel restrictions, then we need to be kind of careful about what that means, no? The last point I would like to share lang in terms of insight lang is opportunity naman, di ba? Yung parang silver lining from this, na lalo na in the worst case scenarios of lalo ito escalation of China, South China Sea, Taiwan, di ba? Or even yung yung economic lang, just economic, yung magiging escalate ng mabuti yung food prices, gas prices, supply chain problems sa medicine, di ba? So talagang, then our government needs to be in war footing also, di ba? In wartime footing. So dito matitest talaga ang leadership, di ba? Both today, di ba? And after the elections, di ba? So I think importante na we demand from our leaders the ability to think strategically, to be disciplined, to listen to experts, di ba? To make the right decisions for the country, to address these scenarios, no, and the consequences. And it starts even with the current president, di ba? Ako personally, in a crisis, in fact, when the pandemic started, yun na yung aking calling, pero parang walang nakikinig, mas lalong naging divided tuloy tayo. But in a crisis na existential like this, di ba? Lalo na nga kung mag-escalate to tension with China, where we have to make very hard choices about our political alliances, di ba? I think importante din yung national unity government, di ba? A true national unity government, ba? Hindi lang yung sinasabi ng isang kampanya. Yung para sa akin, a national unity government releases all political prisoners, di ba? Appoints people into the cabinet from all the political factions, have a permanent political settlement with all on all your social conflicts, kasi basically you cannot afford to have any conflict. Parang yung nangyari sa World War II, di ba? Nung palapit na yung gera na talaga ng Japanese, na nagkaroon tayo ng more or less unified na which of course quickly disappeared after World War II. Yun ang malungkot doon. So I think may opportunity then to have that leadership gap filled and have a national unity government that can address these worst case scenarios if it unfolds that way. So yun lang po. Thank you very much, and looking forward to your questions and to the discussion of the panel.
Thank you very much. That's Dr. Tony Lavinia, UP Professorial Lecturer in Constitutional Law and former Dean of the Ateneo School of Government. Thank you, Tony. And I think you'll see in the chat that our participants appreciate your very broad analysis of what's happening. Kasi, syempre, frontliners natin, busy sila, di ba? Busy sa mga pasyente, busy sa mga pamilya. Maganda kasing minsan we step back and we hear from an expert what the big picture looks like. And I think you really did that very well. So thank you so much, Tony. And I'm going to turn over to Raymond. Raymond, go ahead for our reactors.
Thank you, Sir Tony, for really just giving us a glimpse pa lang po, no? I mean, 30 minutes is not enough for us to be able to really appreciate all of the things and the implications of the Ukraine-Russia issue. But hopefully, that will spur us on to think more along the lines of how can we prepare, especially when it hits us. Our first reactor for today's webinar is a senior lecturer at the UP College of Law. He is both a medical doctor and a lawyer. His areas are in medical jurisprudence and global health law. Please welcome to the webinar for the very first time, Dr. Daniel Lising.
So, hello, Raymond. Thank you for the kind introduction. Well, let me start my reaction by addressing um, some of the concerns that was raised by the Dean Tony. No, one of the concerns that was raised by Dean Tony was the collapse of global institutions. Now, the World Health Organization kasi functions through the World Health Assembly, which is composed of about 194 members, both sovereign countries and some territories. And the way it operates is by consensus. Now, whenever you are going to have a war, any war would be polarizing. And pag nag-polarize yan, the executive board will be paralyzed. So what happens? Well, what happens to the pending important treaties that are going to be debated in the World Health Assembly? Unang-una yon, no? One of the big problems there is that we're negotiating a pandemic treaty. What happens to the pandemic treaty when we have a war between one of the largest members of the United Nations, which is Russia, and it will polarize because, of course, the Russia has already prepared in advance before it embarked on this. So it has cemented its alliances. So, and those alliances will show whenever the World Health Assembly meets. Another thing about this was illustrated by the pandemic, no, that there's really no country that is self-sufficient and can function on its own. And that's why there is a treaty that was signed through the World Health Organization, the International Health Regulations. Now, international health regulations require that there's international cooperation so that we will report any type of event that is of global concern. So it's called the International Health Regulations called the Public Health Emergency of International Concern, of FIEC. Now, what happens during a crisis such as this is that, well, who will enforce these obligations on member states? If the problem there is nobody wants to appear weak whenever there is situations like this. So people will start trying to, like what happened in the 1918 Spanish flu. Nobody was reporting this because there was a lockdown in communications. No? But remember that during the time, wala naman tayong social media. So no social media means that nobody, well, you can control all the news outlets, no newspapers can come out. Diba? That's the reason why it's called the Spanish flu. It's because, well, only Spain reported it, but it didn't really start with Spain. So it's a misnomer. But right now, the other extreme is happening. Because of the presence of social media, there's so many sources of information. Now, there will be an excess of information, and you'll have a hard time filtering out this information. And because of this type of situation, the opposite extreme naman, there will be you'll have a hard time making proper decisions. Now, another thing that can happen also here is, in case a country, something that happened before, no, regarding the flu naman, is virus sovereignty. Now, some countries might want to keep the genomic sequences of viruses that appear in their jurisdictions to themselves. Bakit? Well, it gives them a strategic advantage. They allow themselves to develop a vaccine and then they only give it to their strategic partners. Now, that's a big problem, lalo na if it is something like COVID, that it spread throughout the world. And we all know that the refugee crisis that a conflict creates facilitates the movement of people. And the movement of people is actually what drives pandemics, because it will, well, you don't know if you're a carrier or not, and you can bring all of these diseases to different areas. Like what Professor Geologo said, na during the time that there was a bubonic plague, it was brought through animals. During the Spanish flu, it was brought through people coming home from the war, people being posted to the war, and then when they go back, they are carriers. So that's why the flu spread throughout the world. So that's a big problem in that particular aspect. Now, another thing about that can impact global health is, like was said, global supply chain. Now, we all know, like I said earlier, there's no country that's self-sufficient, and that applies to everything. That applies to manufacturing medicines, that applies to vaccines, and the like. So some part of the vaccine might need to come from the countries that are in conflict, and because they're in conflict, there's an embargo. So there's no way by which we can get those raw materials so that other countries can manufacture them into medical products and medical devices that are needed by our own citizens. Another aspect here that is problematic is, whenever you have a conflict, no, there is a closing up of airspace, sea lanes, and territorial borders. Now, the problem there is those are the means by which goods travel, and if you close them off, there will be no way. You'll have to go through a roundabout route. And since, like Dean Tony said, there will already be a problem with regards to fuel. There will be an increase in the amount that would drive prices up. Now, global health also has something to do with food security. And since Ukraine is a major producer of wheat, I think like more than 50% of wheat comes from Ukraine, then it has an impact on our country as well, because we may be, I'm not quite sure about this now, some other person might be more of an expert on this, but we might be importing these wheat products, and because there is a conflict, then we might not be getting the products that we need in order to supply our own citizens with bread. And if you recall, not regarding this particular, but remember what happened to us during the African swine flu, where we had an experience wherein a lot of the hogs in northern Luzon cannot be traded, had to be killed, and we had increase in the value or the prices of this particular products, pork products. Tapos there is a situation where we don't want to, for example, nobody wants to allow products from another area to come in because of concerns, then that really exacerbates the food security problem. Now, with regard to the China and the possibility of, well, the thing about the response of the West with regard to the conflict in Ukraine, if you look at it, is primarily economic yung sanctions. And they're making embargoes, they're freezing bank accounts. But China has been embarking on a aggressive Belt and Road initiative. That's basically, they have partnered with multiple nations in the Middle East and North Africa, and not only North Africa but South Africa. They've already secured these markets. So even if they join the conflict, they might have secured their markets already. So if we are only going to maintain embargoes and sanctions of that nature as a means to contain the belligerents or the people that are involved in this conflict, what can happen is it might not be sufficient to stop them from escalation. No? So actually, that's I think that's my particular take on the matter.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel Lising. And again, thank you. I think our audience really appreciates these insights no about the World Health Organization, tsaka parang para siyang domino, parang ang daming mga epekto na hindi natin kaagad nakikita, but sa health and that's your expertise, global health, you can really see that there are so many challenges that could occur from this event. Okay, so let's go to our next reactor, our last reactor for today, and by special request, I think we had him before and very much appreciated on this webinar. He is a former director of the Philippine General Hospital, former Undersecretary of Health, and actually nag-aral ng medicine sa UP, di ba? Pero nag-aral din to sa National Defense College and has been really very involved with the defense sector. So we thought it'd be good to bring him back to get his reaction to this. So it's my honor to reintroduce and welcome to the webinar, Dr. Johnny Nañagas. Johnny, over to you.
Thank you, Susie, for that introduction. I would also like to thank Doctors Lising and Viña, because they have touched on most of the relevant topics. But let me add some food for thought. Before the invasion, one of the considerations that the commander of Ukrainian land forces was looking at, they were hoping that the invasion would not proceed. They saw that 2,400 out of 150,000 Russian troops at that time tested positive for COVID. But apparently, that did not factor into the equation. Russia is still invaded. Now, one of the questions that we have been discussing is, now that this conflict has broken out, how will it affect the Philippine health system? In most military planning processes, they look at scenarios. No, one of the scenarios they will think of is what they call the most probable scenario. Another scenario they will look at is the most dangerous scenario. Most probably in the Philippines, we will evacuate OFWs from Ukraine, and some of them already have gone home. It's not, and this may bring some ray of hope. It's not too worrisome, as there are only about 300 in Ukraine. If it affects the security, and I include economic security and safety of surrounding countries, Belarus, Moldova, Russia, Romania, and Poland, the influx of returning OFWs will increase, but I think may still be manageable. Remember, we have experience in dealing with health safety protocols and COVID protocols from our last 2 years of COVID. For me, the most dangerous or worrisome scenario would be if China decides to take advantage of the situation and invades Taiwan, as Dr. Herbosa and Dr. Lavinia have mentioned. They have been testing the waters for several months with flybys by their planes. Although Taiwan is not too far, so it will not be too difficult to repatriate our OFWs. The number, 250,000 Filipinos there, that will cause problems with our processing if they all come in at the same time. However, we can assume that if they were allowed to work there, they are most probably fully vaccinated. So whether from Europe or Taiwan, we can reasonably assume full vaccination status. So our health system hopefully will be able to cope with the influx of our OFW. Another worrisome scenario, although remote, is if conflict involves our territories. And for that, the government, in fact, the whole health sector, has to work together and plan health services in the regions where our military and national security experts expect expeditionary forces to land. I am sure think tanks abroad, and I hope that we also have them here, have estimates on the number of casualties, both civilian and military, and the necessary facilities, equipment, material, and personnel to address them if ever that remote possibility happens. For me, whether in the front lines or attending to civilian refugees, the vaccine status of our military personnel must be updated. A completely vaxxed military will prepare them for frontline duties, but will also prepare them for disaster relief. Uh, as you can see, it played a part in considering whether Russia would invade or not. But apparently, they don't mind if their soldiers are positive. No? Now, supply chain problems have also been mentioned. So, food shortages was mentioned, and you all know that a poorly nourished country will have people with poor immunity, as Dr. J. mentioned. Now, I don't know if FDA or the National Security Council has studied if our pharmaceutical supplies will suffer. We did a study a long time ago, uh, which showed that we have around 6 months supply of medicines if all imports stop. But we know that panic can change that. Kasi a few weeks ago, paracetamol lang, nagkulang na eh. Kasi nag-panic buying ang mga tao. The late Dr. Punong Bayan also told me when I was presenting the concept of this study na, oh, you don't have to study that. Magaling naman mag-smuggle ang mga Pilipinos eh. So, I hope that's true if ever we get medicine shortage. Now, another question that was mentioned was, have we had drills on CBRNE? I'm giving away the answer to the question. CBRNE would be chemical, biologic, radiologic, nuclear, and E is explosives event. To my knowledge, I have not heard of one. Offhand, we probably must start, for me, with a national agency and a plan. The federal government in the US, for example, has a CBRNE branch of its PrEP program, which is Partner Readiness and Emergency Program Division, that advises the federal agencies, state agencies, local, tribal, and territorial levels on public health and medical aspects of CBRNE, preparedness and response. They have, and we should probably do the same, identified members of the subject matter advisory resource team, or SMART, to produce immediate response informational guidance products, provide decision support, and deploy subject matter experts or liaisons to Incident Operations Center. Now, to me, that's the easy part. We have to consider, for example, if we do want to prepare for CBRNE, what are the treatment modalities, let's say, for a radiologic accident? Where is their supply chain? What is their storage? How are they transported to affected areas? It is also imperative that training should be conducted, whether desktop or field exercises. No matter how good you are in conceptualizing our plans, if you do not practice, then it may be disastrous in the actual situation. although we are discussing handling of COVID and its effects during conflict, it will be a good exercise. I've been talking about exercise to look to and prepare for the future. So, will it be advisable for us, for example, to create 3 quarantine and isolation islands like the famous Ellis Island in New York? It's only 12 hectares. Yet, at its heyday, it was able to handle immigrants with its own power source, hospital, laboratories, dormitories, and other facilities. It can also be used for other purposes like training or an evacuation center for disasters. So with that short look into the future, I'll end my comments and bring the show back to Raymond and Susie.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Dr. Johnny Nañagas, former DOH Undersecretary and PGH Director. And I think our audience very much appreciates your inputs, Johnny, no? Kasi very practical, no? And Johnny knows the health sector very well. So I think he's given us some suggestions on what the health sector needs to do. So babalik pa rin natin dun sa health, sa COVID, no? Yun lang, merong parang mas malawak na problema sa likod natin. Okay. So we are now going to our panel discussion, and I'd like to invite all of our guests. So Johnny, Daniel, Tony, and Ted, to open your cameras and your mics. And I'm turning over to Raymond, who will give us a short break. So Raymond, over to you.
While we're waiting for them, we'll just have a very, very quick public service announcement po, which for today, very special din naman po with regards to the topic that we have. Over to you, TVUP.
O Apo, mukhang malalim niyang iniisip mo, ha? Wala ka magpasok ngayon?
Wala po. May disinfection kasi sa grocery.
Ganun ba? Di ba wala rin kayong pasok kahapon? Pati nung isang araw?
Sana makabalik na ako sa trabaho.
O siya. Di na muna kita istorbuhin at mukhang malalim yung iniisip mo.
Hello?
O no?
Magpabakuna na kaya tayo?
Walang problema, Apo. Paunahan mo lang ako eh. Talaga.
Dahil mahal ko kayo, magpapabakuna ako.
Thank you so much, TVUP. That's something that might, spur on po something to think about with regards to the economic effects po ng ongoing po nating pandemic, as well as ito pong Ukraine-Russia issue. Our COVID communication public service announcement po is just one of the many outputs of the UP research entitled Communicating COVID-19 in Post-Quarantine Philippines, headed by the UP Vice President for Public Affairs, Dr. Nenny Pernia, and funded by the PCHRD and the Department of Health through its AHEAD HSPR project. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, thanks a lot, Raymond. Raymond, we're going to monitor any questions that we have. So please put your questions in the chat box for those of you who are watching on YouTube or on Facebook. Please, on Facebook lang pala, no? Wala tayong live stream sa YouTube. Facebook.
Oh, we have.
Oh, sorry, YouTube tsaka Facebook. Okay. You just put it in and we're monitoring that, no? So we'll pick up your questions. But I'd like to ask our reactors, no? Kasi I'm glad Johnny mentioned yung Cbrn, no? Na that war in World War II was quite different. Would be really very different from war today. And one of the things that we need to think about that Russia already employed prior to the invasion of Ukraine was cyber attacks. So I'm going to ask all of you to kind of respond to that just really very quickly because iba na nga yung itsura ng gera ngayon eh, di ba? Parang, and I think everyone has talked already about the possibility of, I like what Johnny said, na parang you have parang a mild scenario where it's not really mild, no, if prices of oil and food go up versus really getting dragged into a war, no? Those are kind of very extreme. But maybe I'll start with Ted. Kasi Ted, sa'yo ko narinig to when we were prepping for this, no, na cyber warfare is probably something that we'll need to prepare for. And I think in the health sector, importante rin yan sa atin, no? Kasi mga ospital natin, our equipment, our machines are all digitalized. So Ted, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, if you look at the history, nung bata ako, mahilig ako magbasa ng mga war stories. And the way to invade a country is really to start with air bombing. Start with an air force, you bomb the area, you bring in the Marines, a naval advance, and then the tanks come in, and then you invaded the country and taken over. But today, we see that that's going to be different. Some people can attack another country through cyber warfare. And several nations have actually put up units of their armed forces just to disable a separate country. In fact, there are talks of being able to control airplanes in the sky and boats and the ships on the water through just cyber hacking and attacking the control panels of all these aircraft. So indeed, yan has to take into a picture. And that has happened before, di ba? Yung the US put the Stuxnet virus into the power generation of Iran. I think alam natin lahat yung story yan. So that's something that Russia can do. But what I've been reading here is that it's the Russian sites that are being attacked by cyber on the internet. So it seems that Ukraine might be using that to counterbalance the physical might. But I'll add to your point because I heard all the talks, and there's something that I'd like to really, I've been advocating ever since I was Undersecretary of Health. I was pushing for a health attaché in countries where we have a lot of Filipinos. And of course, kinausap ko nun yung DFA secretary. The DFA secretary said, no problem, just propose it. It turns out, if you do propose a health attaché that can take care of the health conditions of Filipinos overseas, is that it's got to be in the budget of the DOH. And mahal. You have to pay for the salary of the health attaché. Ilang country yan? Ang daming country na may Pilipino. So if you put a health attaché in every embassy, that's a whole huge department. Tapos noon, you have to sustain their cost of living. Magagalit sa atin ng mga Pilipino kasi you will be paying for a lot of health attachés elsewhere, whereas the healthcare of Filipinos, kulang-kulang pa ang gamot nila. So napatayan. But I think in the global context now, this has got to be a discussion, especially now that we're having elections. The importance of how do we take care of our overseas Filipinos.
Yeah.
They're still Filipino citizens. And we need to put a budget on this. We need to put a handle on this. Para hindi ganito, tatakbo agad yung Secretary of Foreign Affairs pupunta sa Poland. Di ba? There should be a health attaché there taking care of the land entry of the 300 Filipinos in Ukraine entering through Poland, and masikaso sila kaagad and wala tayong problema. So to me, these structures need to be built, this health attaché. And I don't expect all countries. I expect the countries where there are a lot of Filipinos. And I think Dean Tony Viña mentioned some of these countries. And Taiwan might be one of those. I think I'd like to put a health attaché in the, I don't know, you can call it an attaché, right? It's the Manila Economic Cooperation Office. So it's not an embassy. So, but you'd like to put a health person there so that when you prioritize the 250,000 that you want to evacuate, unahin mo yung may health issues at magagawan mo siya ng paraan. So to me, these are the types of capacity building that we need to learn from these global lessons. We need to invest in these things, and we need to make this part of our health system. Ika nga. Actually, ang dami na nun. Yung USEC ako lagi tinatawagan ng DFA ambassador. Pag may i-repatriate, ang hirap kasi you're talking with medical community, medical diagnosis, dumadaan lagi sa DFA. And imagine if there was a doctor there already na naintindihan to, the facilitation would have been very, very fast. So yun ang isa sa mga contribution ko dito sa reactions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ted. No, really food for thought having health attaches, no, and also your inputs on cyber attacks. Tony, let's hear from you on the cyber attacks, and also I think you're in a good position to comment on having health attaches. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, no, that's really a good point. I mean, yung approach na gano'n, I mean, we're very vulnerable, obviously, di ba, sa cyber attack. Lalo na if that worst case scenario with China happens, I mean, then clearly we are also very vulnerable to that. They don't even really have to attack us to di ba, yung ating electric system, yung ating mga computers at lahat. But sa akin, more than anything, Dr. Susie, this is ang approach kasi, di ba, yung this is a global person you're talking to. I actually put when I introduce myself, I always put Mindanaoan, Filipino citizen, and global citizen. Kasi gusto ko emphasize yun na I think global. I've worked for 10 years abroad. I do a lot of I negotiate for the Philippines in many agreements, ganyan. So I'm a very globalization person. Pero what's very clear kasi kailangan ka ng self-sufficiency, di ba? In as much as you can in everything, di ba? In a war, yun talaga yung kailangan mo na and lalo na ngayon na ang difference sa war ngayon sa noon is yung ating interconnectedness, di ba? We are so interconnected na yun yung sa supply chain nga nabanggit na natin yun, di ba? But ito sa computer sa so really important kaya importante sa akin yung needs assessment Yung sinasabi ko, kailangan talaga may malinaw tayong needs assessment and response. So sa akin yung health attaché, di ba, hindi naman kailangan TED sa lahat ng country yun kasi
hindi kailangan lahat.
Sila naman sa mga marami.
Yung pinakamarami.
Na may health So you're probably not talking about, you're probably talking about 15, 20, di ba, countries. Some countries you can, some regions pwedeng regional siya, di ba, kasi
correct.
So I think that's a good idea for that kasi napaka-specialized din ng pangangailangan ng even when you repatriate, di ba? So I think it would be good, especially because may COVID ngayon. How will you saan yung initial screening mo, di ba? Your initial screening will still be in your embassies and in your di ba, in the country of origin before they come back, di ba? So I mean, I don't think we should stop, di ba? We should not allow our Filipinos ang dami kong kaibigang Australians and New Zealanders sa the last 2 years sa kawawa talaga, I have to tell you, kasi talaga kahit sila binabawal umuwi, di ba? So parang I don't think we can do that, but I think we can be rational about it. So yun lang po.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tony, and Ted. I mean, I think we have the most OFWs in Saudi Arabia. I think about 1 million. And then we have a lot in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, obviously. We also have Europe. So I think we don't have to have in all, but we do, and we can, I think, this Raymond, this is for you, right? We can deploy telehealth services also for the ones where we cannot put health attachés, di ba? Kasi iba yung traumatized na Pilipino, na kausap niya, Pilipino din. Kasi nakita ko yan sa Cambodia tsaka sa Vietnam nung nasa WHO ako. No? Parang pag ang isang Pilipino ay merong problema at bibigay mo sa doktor na hindi nakakaintindi, hindi tayo naiintindihan, napakahirap, no? And a lot of the issues are about trauma. So especially in war, you will be dealing with a lot of mental health issues. Okay, anyway, Daniel, what do you think of this new ways that war will be fought, and what kind of preparation should the health sector have?
One of the things that I want to illustrate is, do you remember when the power grid of the United States collapsed? In New York, they were without power for so many days. And in that particular scenario, you saw how vulnerable we are. Kasi if you shut down a person's power grid, their food security suffers, wala silang refrigerator, they lose everything. They lose communications, they lose warmth, they lose in that particular area. Sa atin, we lose water supply because of the requirement for pumping stations. So really, yung effect sa atin ng cyber warfare would be not just software, but infrastructure-wise, it is very heavy. Another thing about it is our country is heavily a sending state. So we send out to many countries our workers, and our Filipinos depend heavily on the communications infrastructure of that are dependent on the internet and dependent on the on power. So that's really a very big problem if you suddenly cut it off. Like China has this great firewall. If they're able to use it against people in China, then they can certainly have that experience to use it against us. Now, with regard to the health attaché, one of the things that we have to consider is that one of the things about the Philippines is we have a lot of health workers abroad. So it's not really required that you physically station somebody there because you already have people there that are health workers. All we have to do is tap the very, very deep Filipino community. Actually, that's one of the weaknesses of Western Europe right now. They lack health workers. That's why they're draining us health workers because they don't have nurses, they don't have medical personnel, and these medical personnel are in a very good situation to understand the local systems, the local conditions, and relay it to the Filipino counterpart. So actually, I think that's an opportunity rather than a big problem for us. We just have to make sure that we have to designate people. Because the problem is too many cooks spoil the dish. Yun ang nangyayari minsan. Too many people are putting information and causing disinformation in the end.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel, for sharing those thoughts. Johnny, you were the one who raised CBRNE, which I think we need to talk about a little bit with our frontliners. No? And when I was with the Red Cross, I was doing some tabletop exercises with the team here because there was a US training for the fire department, and the Red Cross, of course, was involved in it. But Johnny, no, so if we go to the pinakapangit na scenario, okay, so we said, okay, the easy scenario is probably we're not involved. It will be mainly about supplies, like when Crimea was invaded, prices of gasoline will go up. But what if, all right, what if we get to a point where there is really kinetic warfare that affects the Philippines and other kinds of weapons are used, like nuclear weapons, for example, if there was a conflict with Taiwan, or if, the neighbor there in North Korea thinks na they need to pay to get some attention too. What do we need to do to prepare for that, Johnny? Kasi, parang I don't want to scare people, but I do believe that we have to be able to prepare and predict, no? Because that's what happened to us in COVID. We knew in the public health sector na pwedeng mangyari ito, and yet we did not prepare. So anong tingin mo dyan, Johnny? How do we get to a point where we're actually prepared for the worst case scenario? Yan. Paano ba yun?
Well,
also talk about that.
yeah. If we look at the developed countries, they think of scenarios, and what if this scenario happens? This would be my possible destructive area. In that destructive area, even if it's not destructive, if this is the area of my biological exposure, ilang tao ang pwedeng maapektuhan, ano ang kailangan mong gamot, anong kailangan mong facilities, kahit na at least ang ginagawa ng iba, meron silang playbill . Nakalagay na yung mga scenarios na yan, hinuhugot na lang. I've seen it in the US military na halimbawa earthquake in Indonesia, bubunutin lang nila yung kanilang playbill, nakasulat na doon sinong papadala, saan manggagaling, tapos di ba parang at least meron kang uumpisahan. Mahirap
Wala
yung...
ba tayong ganon? Wala ba tayong ganon, Johnny?
Ay, I have not really seen one. We were trying to develop those, no? But in fact, we were trying to develop something where details like if this happens, call this number, this person you speak to, tapos you start a cascade of actions that will set the ball rolling, no? We wanted to do something like that in Stop Death at the time. Ito naman Stop COVID tayo ngayon eh. But I think it can be done. We're not lacking in forward thinkers, no? Ang problema lang pag minsan pag sa implementation makikita na halimbawa you're supposed to have a stockpile of anti-radiation sickness medicines. Tapos makikita mo yung pala wala na yung stockpile, nabenta pala ng mga ng mga kaya I think our planner should at least start something. So we have a guide. It's like sailing. We have a map, no? It's hard if you don't have a map. So let's start with trying to get a map of what we want to do in case of those things, no?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Johnny. Ted, can you talk a little bit about this? Because you're now head of the ER department of PGH, and we all know that if a worst case scenario occurs, PGH comes to the front of this, di ba? We didn't, in COVID, that is exactly what happened, di ba? Parang there was a lot of discussion around it, but at the end of the day, PGH rallied to be the kind of technical lead in COVID, and I think that role has been played very well by the Philippine General Hospital. Of course, there were other hospitals, no, Lung Center and Jose Rodriguez. But so Ted, what if we're already on the precipice of this? What should we be doing? What would you like to do?
Actually, what we had been trying to do, okay, so actually when I was executive vice president of the university, one of the degrees we wanted to put up was this one, Cbrn, and we were trying to find a home for whoever with it. Kasi yung ating National Poison Control, Irma Macalino has been pushing for Cbrn. We have a unit already at the emergency department with capacity from the from the US government with all the decontamination and equipment. So there's actually improvement. The armed forces also have their own teams for this. But I think what is more important behind these response teams is really the support science behind it. And these are building, let's say for biologicals, we need to have that virology institute like 10 decades ago. Right? We should have built that and would have been used. Like it can be used for a pandemic, and it can be used for we need a vaccine production. If you want to fight biologicals, vaccine production is another one. And then, so we have a national poison control. We only have one. We should have a poison control unit and toxicology center in every region.
Yeah.
Right. So it's all the regions where we actually have one. So and then we have to train our emergency service. I'm communicating with someone watching, si Colonel, with the Bureau of Fire. Ang Bureau of Fire, meron din tayong capacity na rin for CBRN. But what has happened is there are sputterings of efforts in different agencies in government. Someone needs to consolidate and solidify all these efforts into a unified system and invest. I think the country needs to invest in this because it's sad when it happens and we don't have it. Parang itong COVID-19, di ba? Nagkakamahog tayo to get vaccines. When in fact, we should have produced a vaccine center way back. Project ko nga yun eh. Hindi lang tinuloy nung predecessor namin yung vaccine self-sufficiency project. But I think there are things we miss that we actually should be doing. I think that's why conversations like this are very important. Panels like this are very important. Because it opens up the minds of the young people listening to this. Matatanda na kami nila Dr. Laviña tsaka ni Johnny Nañagas eh. Ipapasa na namin yung baton kasi this requires capacity and capability building more than just initial action. Well, of course, leadership is important, but again, this requires building blocks in chemical and industrial setup so that you are prepared. It requires, like for example, I trained in Israel. You know, their chemical decontamination is the whole parking lot at the back of the Kim Shiva Medical Center. You know, they set up showers in the lampposts. So they're lampposts at night, but during a chemical disaster in the drill, the cars all go away and the people are decontaminated in that area. So ganun. Yung sa Rambam Hospital naman, for pandemic, they converted the several parking floors of the hospital. Naalis din lahat ng kotse doon, biglang COVID ward na siya. And they used that during the COVID ward. So those are the things we need to be building, dual purpose units that can prepare us for the eventualities that are not so common. Kasi kahit sa Bagyo lang, evacuation center, ginagamit pa rin natin, eskwelahan. So I think we need to start building and thinking about all those, yung mga highly probable na disasters, and build the right structures for them. And then also think of like the CBRNE and conflicts. And we also think about how to have dual purpose infrastructure for them so that we can respond just in case those events happen in the Philippines.
Nice. Galing, ano? Parang hindi naman tayo nagkukulang ng talino, no? Parang hindi nagkukulang ng ideya. Pero pagdating talaga dun sa gagawin na, dun yung may palya, no? Palyado dun, eh. So we have to, but I think this is really great to have you guys here and to have this conversation. And Raymond, I think you'd like to pick up on some questions for from the audience.
Some of these have already been tackled, Dr. Susie, but this one, well, I'll choose the one that's a little bit more unique. This comes from Claire, and her question reads: gender-based violence increases in times of crisis. So how will the double crisis of the war and the pandemic impact the health risks associated with gender-based violence and its implications in the Philippines, and how do we respond to them?
Tony siguro yan. Tony Love.
Magandang question yon. We know that happens. I mean, so dapat part na yun of the needs assessment mo, di ba? Sa kung mag-repatriation ka, di ba? Kung may refugee crisis ka, dapat you have to be ready for that. I mean, idiin ko lang sinabi ni Dr. Nañagas kanina about yung how important yung scenario is planning is, di ba? Na meron kang plano for every scenario. Alam mo, hindi tayo magaling doon, magaling tayo actually sa na-envision naman natin naman kailangan gawin. In fact, there's a really nice yung DOST came out with a very good book, yung Pagtanaw 2050, which is about yung role of science, di ba? In all the different fields, looking at 2050, ang galing. Ang dami natin pwedeng gawin kasi grabe yung ating di ba, yung alam naman natin ang galing ng human capacity natin, di ba? Yung human resource capacity natin, di ba? But ang kulang na nakikita ko doon, di ba, is nandun yung capacity building, pero which is important, pero yung capacity building for specific crisis, di ba? Na ready mo siya i-pull out. Wala. So every time may crisis tayo, di ba, tayo, no?
Nag-iimbento tayo ng bago.
Example,
suggestion.
it's all, di ba, it's all institutional memory. Buti na lang, sabi nga nito, matanda na kami. So I know, for example, it's my institutional memory na, di ba, I can call Ted, and, we also communicate in matatawagan ko siya anytime, di ba? Dapat kasi hindi ganun, lalo na yung archipelago and all over the world and Philippines, dapat meron kang institutional responses, di ba, na ready nga to pull out anytime. I think priority talaga yun. Given na, di ba, the stakes in this, pero opportunity yun, Susie, di ba? That the crisis gives us kasi may oras pa tayo eh. Kasi yung long term, yung medium term scenario sa akin, di ba? That won't unfold for another month or two, di ba? Yung immediate talagang wala na tayong magawa doon, yung talagang i-respond na natin. But we really have to prepare for all those other things. There's no excuse for it, di ba?
Yeah, Tony, there's an interesting comment here in the chat. Sabi, Sabi, well, all those publicly visible presidential candidates do not have this thinking. So let the private sector initiate all of these ideas. What do you think of that, Tony?
Well, we have to challenge our presidential balls. I mean, really, our candidates, di ba? Sa akin, personally, naging game changer yung crisis na ito. Di ba? Kasi you really have to have this is not gonna, wala, non-partisan ako even now. I try to do that to help people. But importante talaga, you have to have an adult, di ba? You have to have yung work ethic na you need a 24/7 president for this kind of crisis, di ba? Someone who listens to experts, bring experts in, di ba? Good management skills, strategic thinkers, di ba? Yung may gravita. I mean, all of those things na para if ever we need a president that really is able to be a crisis manager, this is the time. Kasi grabe, nandyan pa yung COVID, di ba? Hindi natin alam. I mean, kung may iba pang mukha ang COVID, di ba? Hindi pa natin alam yan. Alam natin na ngayon medyo makaka-relax tayo ng konti, pero alam ko din na ready rin ako anytime na I follow naman the science and I know that kahit sino sa inyo magsabi na tapos ng COVID, hindi naman ako maniniwala, di ba? Kasi I have to listen, I have to watch muna for what happens. It's a very a deceptive enemy, di ba? So at then itong crisis na ito, di ba? So I think very important sa atin yung leadership opportunities to really have good leaders to do this. Hindi rin kasi siya pwede private sector lang eh. Sa totoo lang, hindi naman talaga siya pwede na kasi kung private sector lang na naman, parang to each his own na naman tayo, di ba? Hindi ito pwede, ito talagang totally yung tinatawag na whole of nation approach, di ba? In the real sense, di ba, na wala ka talagang dapat iniiwanan dito at dapat pinapakinggan mo lahat.
Yeah.
Susie, can I comment?
Sige, go ahead, Ted.
I want to thank the one who asked the question on gender. Kasi nga, I've been working in disaster risk reduction for a long time. And we've actually discovered that there is a problem. There is a vacuum of gender issues in crisis management and crisis response. And the reason for this is when we sit around the table of us disaster risk people we look at each other and walang gender balance. Panay lalaki kami that are interested in this field. We need to get more women interested in issues of crisis management, disaster risk reduction, climate change. When there are more women sitting around the table, it changes my perspective. Alam ko yan eh. All my children are daughters. Babae lahat ng anak ko. And when I sit at the table, my choice of food, what I wear, what I say is all commented on by women around the table. 5 women on the table. And that's very important. To me, when people are planning the direction of the country in terms of chemical, biological, crisis management, disaster risk, kailangan may equal balance of women there. Otherwise, makakalimutan talaga. So it's very important that the women get engaged. We need to have some women na mag-lead dito, maging interested in crisis and disaster risk and climate advocacy. Sa climate, marami sila. Pero sa disaster, emergency response, crisis, pagtingin ko around the table, siguro may isa. Ganun. Parang ganun. Pero of 10 or 20 people, lahat kayo panay lalaki. So very important. If she wants that addressed, and next month is Women's Month. March is Women's Month. And before this conference, I was listening to young women in science sa PAASE. And I was so impressed with these young women in science. So we need these women also sitting down around the table of risk and crisis so that we can have those issues actually addressed during these times. Thank you.
Thanks. Important
Dr.
point. No? Okay, so Daniel, go ahead. Dr. Daniel.
I just want to comment regarding yung sinabi about private sector leadership. One of the problems in private sector leadership is something that has been encountered in global health funding. Kasi if you leave it all to private sector, nagkakaroon sila ng silos. We're interested only in this, we're only interested in this. So if you leave it completely to the private sector, that is something that has been already seen in, for example, the AIDS response. Parang we have disproportionate funding in AIDS response, and disproportionate thinking, pero wala tayong nag-iisip ng emerging infectious diseases kasi hindi man sila naapektuhan. Private sectors kasi, they usually fund things that they are interested in or personally affect them. And that's why we cannot fully give it to private sector to think about this. This must be really private and public partnerships. Cannot be just one. to be able to be effective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel, for that point. Okay, so
Can
Ted,
I say
think-
something, Susie?
Yeah, Johnny, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, just 15 seconds.
No, no,
And
go
just a just a follow up on what Dr. Lising said. No, na I have seen a private sector establishment, and this was mentioned in one of the comments sa chat na you need something like the RAND Corporation to do something like this, yung mga strategic thinking. I think it can be done, and as Dr. Lising said, it has to be both private and public.
Johnny,
But,
teka muna, may takip yung mukha mo. Sandali. Can you fix your camera a little bit? Natakpan.
well,
There you go. Thanks.
but ang problema kasi sa private sector, unless yung mga magpa-fund nito ay very altruistic, they need to make money. But this is what the RAND Corporation has done. It has converted into a commercial venture. But they have the experts, or they go to the experts and hire them for questions that arise, such as the questions that we have raised here. No, so I think we should involve the private sector. Look at the big corporations and ask them to put some funds into things like this, because they do this also. Big companies have crisis management committees that take a look at economic, geopolitical, etc. And how will it affect their business? So this time, not just their business, but how will it affect the country? No, so I think somebody can start it. Someone from the big companies.
Yeah, very good point. No, so ang ganda na usapan natin. Sorry, wala na tayo oras. Okay, so I'm gonna ask our panel to take a 1-minute break, right? And just formulate your parting words for our audience. You can see the comments, no? Their appreciation of your talks. Ted, maraming nag-agree sa'yo na dapat mas maraming babae. You can see our audience is very interactive. They like to share what they're thinking, no? So we'd like you to formulate your parting words. And meanwhile, we're going to do an evaluation. And Raymond, you're gonna answer the fun quiz first?
Let's go. Yes, let's go with the fun quiz first. The two questions that we have: if there is a war in Europe, which will be affected po, no? And there's really not just one answer for this question. And I think we've already heard from our experts po, no, that all of these will be affected: prices of food, price of fuel, drugs and medicines, repatriation, mental health. So these really are sort of just the tip of the iceberg ng mga maaapektuhan po kung magtuloy-tuloy at lumala po ang gera po sa Europa. Second question, we'll pose to our experts para manggaling na po sa kanila. Maybe Dr. Lising can answer this. What does CBRN mean? Kasi po may mga iba pa rin po na sumagot ng ibang kasagutan. So ano po ang tamang kasagutan, Dr. Lising, for this one?
Yeah, the answer is the chemical, biological, radiologic, and nuclear events. No.
Thank you, Dr. Daniel. So yun po ang ating tamang sagot, no? So hopefully that's something that sticks when you hear of the acronym po CBRN, especially in the context of what we're talking about. We also have our evaluation poll for our panelists. It's comprised of 5 questions, 4-point Likert scale. Can we have it on the screen? Thank you so much. The statements are as follows. The panelists demonstrated thorough knowledge of the topic. The panelists were well prepared and organized. The panelists spoke clearly and audibly. Number 4, the panelists used appropriate language with technical medical jargons adequately explained. And number 5, the panelists contributed to new perspectives and knowledge on managing key COVID-19 health issues. I think it's a little bit fluctuating, but hopefully marami po ang sumagot ng ating evaluation poll. Wala po kaming hiwalay na evaluation poll. Ito lang po talaga ang aming evaluation poll, lalo na po sa mga direct message at nag-email po sa amin. We will continue to keep that open ang evaluation poll, and for those who a little bit po na na hindi na just because of their busy schedule hindi po mapanood in its entirety, lalo po yung mga nakamiss po ng ating webinar for today. Meron po tayong tinatawag na SCD shorts. These are just very very short clips that we have prepared, just very easily consumable po, just going straight to the point for all of our previous webinars. Hopefully you'll be able to watch them. They're just a few minutes po, and we really enjoin you, if you're not able to watch the webinars in the playback, to watch these short clips po. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, thank you so much for those announcements, Raymond. Okay, so parting words, let's start with backward Dr. Nañagas. Johnny.
Well, as I've said, if we are going to start, let's start with a plan. And when we take a look at an issue, let us take a look at both intended and unintended consequences. Ibig sabihin, hindi lang yung nakikita natin na mangyayari, lahat ng pwedeng mangyari based on what happened. No? May mga effect kasi na hindi mo nakikita, yung pala merong ganung effect. No? So keep your minds open, keep your eyes open, and look at all the possibilities that may happen.
Thank you. That's Dr. Johnny Nañagas. Wait, Daniel, go ahead.
Hi. So actually, I'll frame my closing remarks with regarding we really have to start thinking strategically, and that we have to start creating infrastructure that can address these types of issues, no? Like Dr. Ted said, and we really should create dual use type of technology, and even just developing our national emergency response system should be something that should be made a priority. This was illustrated in our in what happened in COVID. We didn't even have ambulances, no? So we really needed to create a national system so that we could address these types of issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel Lising. Tony Lavinia. Tony, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess for me, the last point I would like to make is, let's not waste this crisis, diba? Let's in fact put into place, regardless of whether the worst scenarios come about, diba, all the things that we should have done years before, diba? Sa crisis management, I mean, in this type of issues. So that's what yun lang ano ko na sana ma-identify natin yon, and then gawin na natin siya in the next couple of months. I mean, mabilis parang akala natin, di ba, when we started talking about this, it will be weeks away pa, di ba? And then yun na, even before this event, nag-invasion na, di ba? So I think it's important to use this as an opportunity to leverage actions that we should have done a long time ago. Yun lang po. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Ted, parting words.
Do I have 1 hour? No, because this is
Oh,
my
you don't.
crisis and disaster management. And siguro my parting words are, you know what? Crisis will always happen. Disaster risk will always happen. What is important is how we as individuals are going to respond to it. And I will ask the government to do what they have to do. But what is more important is each individual. For example, each head of family must have a family disaster plan. Do you have a go bag? Do you have a common place to go to after, let's say we are invaded by a big country? Paano ang gagawin mo sa family mo? And these are things you need to think about. You need to think about this. and probably discuss this in the dining table with your family. Make sure that pagka na-invade tayo at yung mga nandiyan dyan sa Double Dragon, bigla ng military uniforms na suot niyan, kailangan magkikita tayo kay Lola, kay Auntie, di ba? Yung parang you have your escape zone so everybody knows where they will go. So we've got to be forward thinking. Hindi naman ako nananakot, pero the government will only make plans up to the barangay level, but it will not make plans for the family level. And I honestly think individuals should make plans for at the family level and at the neighborhood level, kasi yung tutulong sa'yo in times of crisis ay yung mga kaibigan at yung kapitbahay. Yun lang. Maraming salamat, Susie.
Thank you very much, Ted. Okay, so for our closing and our summary, we have Chancellor Menchit Padilla of University of the Philippines, Manila. Chancellor Menchit, go ahead.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. So our webinar today was opened by Dr. Ted Herbosa, and Dr. Ted gave an overview on the situation in Russia and Ukraine. And as this situation in Europe evolves, Dr. Ted explains the need to likewise monitor the situation in China, Taiwan, and the West Philippine Seas. Russia said, exercise restraint to avoid getting out of control. China said not to rush to conclusion. Dr. Ted said that with all of the recent events, our concern right now, the COVID pandemic recovery might be compromised. Our main presenter is Dean Dr. Tony Lavinia, who focused on the implications of the Ukraine crisis on the Philippines. The Dean said that this is the biggest war after World War II, and it has the risk of becoming a bigger war. Dean Lavinia provided the perspectives on the conflict, and I encourage you to watch the replay and understand the impact of economic sanctions on the Philippines and the world. Another point that you need to further study is the impact of this war on NATO countries. Dean Lavinia presented the immediate consequences within the next week or two. First, we need to evacuate the 300 OFWs in Ukraine. Second, definitely this will affect job opportunities in Europe. Third, in the modern world, cities will be affected. Fourth, expect increase in gas prices within the week. There will be production prices for flour, bread, and thus will increase prices for all of us. Fifth, this will affect the supply chains for the COVID medicines and other things. So in other words, there will be an overall inflation. Dean Lavinia moved on to the medium-term scenarios beyond 6 months to the next years. He expressed concern on the following issues. First is the possible collapse of global cooperation, institutions like the UN and WHO with the Russia and China partnership. Well, second, climate change action will be a casualty. Third, trade and tourism in Europe will be affected. He cautioned us, monitor carefully the effect of the Ukraine crisis on China, Taiwan, and the West Philippine Seas. So in terms of crisis response, Dean Lavinia emphasized the importance of a needs assessment in terms of diplomacy, its cooperation with WHO, and the country's alternatives in terms of supplies. We must recognize the importance of self-sufficiency, and we must look at both demand and supply side strategies. Dean Lavinia said that this new crisis is a test of leadership. We must hear strategic decisions for response to this new crisis, not only from our current leaders, but for our presidential candidates. He calls on national unity across all political groups to address this worst-case scenario. This happened during World War II, and he said, why not? We must exercise this again. Our first reactor is Dr. Daniel Lising. His first comment was on the possible collapse of the institution like the WHO. Indeed, this war will polarize the countries. This will affect the pandemic treaty. This COVID pandemic has shown that no country can be self-sufficient, hence the pandemic treaty. Self-sufficiency is not only for vaccines, but also applies to food, raw materials, and devices that may be put on embargo. His next reaction was on the role of social media. There is excessive information and difficulty of filtering. And sometimes, the problem is this may affect decision-making. His third comment was related to COVID. Some countries might want to keep the sequences for strategic advantage for development of vaccines. And of course, this affects the world. He actually commented on the readiness of China. Should there be economic sanctions? He observed, China has secured its markets through the Belt and Road initiatives. They are ready. Our second reactor is Dr. Johnny Nañagas. He said, how does this affect the Philippines? Dr. Johnny said, let us look at two scenarios. The most probable scenario is that we will evacuate the 300 OFWs in Ukraine. Economic security will be a major issue and will affect neighboring countries. But he said, the most dangerous scenario is the situation of China and Taiwan, since we have 250,000 OFWs to protect. Our health system must be ready for the influx of our OFW health workers and other workers should the war break out. He proposed a preparation of the whole health sector and plan where casualties will be brought in the eventuality of a war. His second major concern is the need for a plan for a CBRN, emergency preparedness and response. So what is CBRNE? It means chemical, biologic, radiologic, nuclear, and explosive events. We have to prepare for all scenarios. He said it is a good exercise to prepare for the future. He said, should we be planning for quarantine islands? Should any of these crises happen to the Philippines? That's a question for all us to think about. So in closing, let me end with the lessons from the influenza of 1918, which happened right after World War I. Because of the war, there was a rapid spread of diseases because of movement of soldiers and also of people moving outside of war areas. These people may be carriers of certain diseases. The spread of the disease was aggravated by reduced resistance due to lack of food. At gaya nga ng sinabi ni historian Dr. Dialogo, magkakambal, ang sakit at gera. Kaya dapat tayo laging handa. To prepare for any crisis, Dean Viña said, we need a whole-of-nation approach. But for today, probably the most fitting closing for today's webinar is a quote from Pope Francis. And he said, let us pray. That's all. Doc Susie, and back to Doc Susie and Doc Raymond.
Thank you very much, Menchit, for a very, what should I say, a very heartfelt closing. I think we will get through this, okay? We've talked about this in the webinar. We've survived COVID. We're gonna get through this, whatever it is. And our purpose is really just to equip you with information so that you are not caught unaware by things that will happen. And I think we had a great panel today. Okay, so next week, naku, we've got a very nice topic. We always have a nice topic and I'm always excited. But this one is, we're gonna take up yung paulit-ulit na COVID na naman. Kasi marami tayong nakikita na nagka-COVID na, nabakunahan na, nag-COVID pa ulit. No? So COVID-19 na naman, repeat COVID-19. And we will also talk about the long-term effects of COVID. I think we have some data coming from the Philippine General Hospital on this one. We're going to have the Department of Neurosciences. We're going to have Dr. Camilo Roa and Dr. Fidel Nimenso, Chancellor of UP Diliman, who has had COVID, I don't know how many times. And Gaple Gaspi, our Director of PGH, who also had COVID, I don't know how many times. So we're going to talk about paulit-ulit na COVID. Okay, over to you, Raymond. So don't forget, Friday, magandang topic natin. Sige,
thank you.
Raymond, ikaw na.
Thank you, Dr. Susie, and thank you po to our Chancellor for really, heartfelt nga po yung ating closing remarks. Just to put everything into perspective po, lalo na po na meron po tayong panibagong banta na naman na kailangan bantayan po natin. Before we conclude our webinar for today, just a very, very short announcement in preparation for our second year anniversary of the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series. Meron po tayong tinatawag na COVID-19 Heroes Memorial. Call for photos po. We want to be able to honor and remember the sacrifices of our Filipino medical frontliners. Hindi lang po sa Pilipinas, but all over the world. We hope that we'd be able to get the stories din po and not just the photos kung meron man po kayo, lalo na po yung mga nagsakam po sa COVID-19. So please send them po The graphic po is shown on the screen and that shows the deadline po at saan nyo po siya ipapadala at kung ano man pong impormasyon ang hinihiling po namin. And also, we would like to thank the very hardworking team behind the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series. Without each and every one of you, we will not be able to churn out quality content po. Gaya po na nasabi po natin, hindi lang po ito magpo-focus sa clinical, but also yung pong the public health side of all things related to COVID-19. And finally, all Stop COVID Deaths webinars are archived for viewing at the YouTube channel of TVUP. If you go to www.youtube.com/TVUPPH, you'll be able to see all previous 88 webinars. Magiging 89 na po siya after today's webinar, and hopefully we'll see each other again next week. So this formally closes our webinar for this week po, no? Next week, very very interesting again na topic, especially for those na mga nagka-COVID na. Sana po ay mas marami pa po ang dumalo sa ating webinar for next week, Friday 12 noon to 2 p.m. It's a date.
Together, we can stop COVID deaths.
So keep safe, keep healthy. See you online!
The enemy remains unseen. I'll keep your hand in mine. Let's say a prayer one more time. I know you long for home, but I am here, you're not alone. I'll stay with you until the coast is clear. The others pain before my fears, the others laughs before my tears. But right behind the mask, I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? My God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'm here to hold the line. I'll keep my word until my time. Look into my eyes and say his name to realize it's fine to be afraid. Just hold on to the word he gave. This time will come to pass, 'cause this salvation's made to last. He'll carry you to see the break of day. The others pain before my fears, the others vows before my tears. But right behind the mask, I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? But God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'm here to hold the line. I'll keep my word until my time. The others pain before my fears, the others laughs before my tears. But right behind the mask, I look into myself and ask, do I have strength to carry on? My God, how long must this go on? I need you here to keep me strong. I'll keep my word, your word is mine. The others pain before my fears, I'm pushing on despite the tears. Please take us through another day. Just hold my hand, I will hold the line. I will hold